You waited patiently at night, staring blankly at your phone. It was already past 11 p.m., and soon enough midnight was going to strike. Sugawara promised you that he would be home by 8 p.m., but there was no sign of him returning. He didn't answer any calls or reply to any of your messages. This wasn't like him at all. You began to worry yourself out. What if something happened to him? You thought. Your heart grew anxious, and it kept you up that night. You somehow ended up dozing off on the sofa and wasn't awakened until something was placed over you. Koushi. Your eyes opened slowly to see Sugawara beside you. His hands stiffened and he awkwardly smiled at you. Sorry to wake you up. He apologized. You shook your head and stood up to hug him tightly. Your anxious heart had died down and you felt better. Your eyes met the clock, and the smaller hand was pointing to 5. You pulled back and met his brown orbs. Why did you come home so late? You asked. He let out a chuckle. Daichi-san got crazy with the drinks at his place, and I kinda knocked out after. Sorry I didn't reply to your calls or messages, Effin. You shook your head and smiled. You must be tired. Get some sleep. He stared at you and slowly nodded before heading to the bedroom you both shared. He changed into some comfortable clothes and headed for the bed. While on the other hand, you had to get ready for work. You prepared yourself and cooked a small breakfast before heading out. Your workplace wasn't far. You could get there by feet, so you had always walked to it. It was already almost 7 when you headed off toward your work building. Your co-workers greeted you happily as you headed for your desk. Your best friend, Hiyori, came by and sat down at her desk that was right beside yours. Another long day of paperwork, she said and chuckled. You nodded and started off with your pile of unfinished paperwork. The day went by slowly, as usual for you, and lunch seemed so far away. The large stack of files by your desk grew smaller and smaller as the time went by. Lunch finally arrived, and Hiyori had offered to treat you to lunch this time. You agreed, and the both of you headed out. A small restaurant ended up being the choice, and you two ate there. While eating, you spotted Daichi and his girlfriend at the same restaurant as well. Oh, Daikun! Yui-san, you waved. He noticed you and headed toward your table. Lunch break? He guessed, and you nodded your head in reply. I'm surprised you didn't have a hangover, Daikun. You chuckled. He looked at you and tilted his head. Hangover? Yeah, all the drinking with Koushi must have been crazy. You now laughed and calmed yourself down. Suga and I never drank yesterday, Daichi stated. Hearing that, you stopped with a happy mood and turned to look at him. Now it was your turn to tilt your head. But Koushi said you two were drinking yesterday. Daichi had a hint on the situation and shook his head. I was home watching a volleyball tournament yesterday with Yui. Oh, look at the time. Yui, we have to get going. But we just got here. Yui's statement was cut off. We'll see you two around. Daichi bowed and dragged Yui away. You sat in your seat quietly as the thought processed through. If Sugawara was not at Daichi's house yesterday, then where was he? Hearing that wasn't painful, but finding out that Sugawara wasn't truthful with you hurt a lot. Hiyori patted your back and assured you that everything was okay. Maybe he might be preparing a surprise for you or something. She smiled, trying to lift up the gloomy atmosphere. You nodded, but deep down, you didn't feel as happy as before. Lunch ended bitterly as you two headed back to work. The rest of the day continued. The thought roamed your mind endlessly, and your heart became even more anxious. Work ended late for the two of you that night. He already walked with you out, and then went separate ways when her boyfriend came to pick her up. You bid her goodbye and headed home. You walked slowly, trying to gain some time to think. You had noticed that he had been going out often and had also been coming home late. He always smiled for you and kissed you often, so it couldn't be possible that he wanted to break up with you. You crossed that choice off your list and realized that you were already by the front door of your apartment. This was the first time you ever felt so nervous in a while. You grabbed the keys from your bag and opened the door, with hopes to see him ready to greet you. As the door opened, you were only met with an empty living room and a silent apartment. You took off your shoes and went to the bed to check if he was still sleeping. His figure was not seen anywhere around the apartment, and you ended up sitting alone at the dinner table thinking, if he was going to surprise you, this wasn't making you feel great at all. You somehow managed to move your legs again and went to shower. After getting out and into a set of comfortable clothes, you ended up waiting that night. Again, Sugawara came home earlier than you thought he would. He walked into the apartment with a smile on his face and a shopping bag in his hand. Koushi, you called his name. He looked up at you and his smile changed completely. Oh, you're up again, Effin. You nodded and smiled. Are you hungry? I cooked your favorite supper, spicy mapo tofu. Thank you, Effin-san, but I already ate out with Asahi and Nishinoya-san. He gave you an apologetic smile. You shook your head. It's okay then. Your eyes then wandered to the shopping bag he was holding and asked what it was. He excitedly pulled out a shirt, and his bright smile returned again. I bought it at the store because I thought it looked nice. You wanted to chuckle at him like you normally did, but it came out strained. He looked at you with a pout. You don't like it? You immediately shook your head and smiled. I love it. It brings out your facial structure and hair color. He wasn't convinced so easily and saw right through you. Did something happen at work today? He asked, putting his shirt away and placing the bag on the table. He walked toward you and sat beside you. Sugawara grabbed your hand and looked at you. I'm okay, you told him. He shook his head. What's wrong? You wanted to tell him you were fine, but you knew it wasn't going to get you out of it. You looked down and sighed. It was quiet for a long time before you spoke up again. I saw Daichi-kun today during my lunch break at a restaurant. You mentioned from the corner of your eye you could see him stiffen. Did you? He let a forced chuckle out. Daichi-san is always eating. Where did you go yesterday night, Koushi? You asked. Sugawara's bright face lost its light. He knew he could not escape this question now with a simple reply. I'm sorry, Effin. He started off. I went out to look for some gifts for you. You pulled your hand away from him and stood up while nodding your head. I forgot that I have to work early tomorrow too, you mumbled. I'm going to sleep first. Sugawara watched as you walked away into the bedroom. He sat there, with guilt running through his veins. That night had seemed to be colder than usual for the both of you. The following week became worse and worse for your relationship with Sugawara. Everything you had created with him felt like it was burning out, like a match about to die from the fire that devoured it. You met Sugawara back in the start of college, and the collision of him into your life created a huge spark. But in the end, that spark began to die out. You held on, but it didn't feel the same anymore, and you could definitely see it in his eyes that the warmth inside him was gone. There was no more spark between your hearts. You later found out that he had been going out with a girl behind your back, but you couldn't feel any more pain in your heart to hate him or for what he had done. You understood very well why he did it, and it was partially your fault. You could have saved the relationship. You could have prevented the dying sparks from fully disappearing, but you didn't. And because of that, something you had cherished was broken. This should be the last box. You placed a small cordwood box into the back of Hyori's car. You turned and looked at the man before you. The man that stood with you for 4 years was someone you didn't recognize at all. In his eyes were guilt and sadness as he looked at you. You gave him your last, brightest smile and a small wave. Goodbye, Koushi. You entered the passenger seat of the car and closed the door. Sugawara wanted to stop you, but his legs would not move. His heart clenched in pain as he watched the car drive off, taking you with it, leaving an empty space inside of his heart.